안녕하세요. 잠들이입니다. 오늘도 하루의 마무리를 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 안드레아오님, 오늘은 이솝우화군요. 두근두근. 어린 왕자에 나오는 여우처럼 12시가 되기 전에 잠잘 준비를 하고 기다리고 있습니다. 어제도 듣다가 잠이 들었습니다. 고맙습니다. 네, 안드레아오님도 감사합니다. 항상 같이 함께 해주셔서 저도 정말 감사한 마음이고요. 제가 조금이나마 도움이 될 수 있어서 저도 참 감사한 마음입니다. 네, 아모스님, 안녕하세요. 기다리고 있었습니다. 헤헤. 네, 안녕하세요. 기다려주셔서 감사합니다. 오늘도 어떻게 좋은 하루 보내셨나요? 저는 여지껏 그랬듯 이제 하루가 시작인데요. 하루를 시작하기에 이렇게 하는 게 너무너무 좋은 것 같아요. 하루를 시작하게 하는 행복 에너지랄까요. 네, 정나래님, 와, 영어다 영어. 영어 이야기 기다렸어요. 네, 감사합니다. 영어를 기다리시는 분들이 생각보다 좀 있으신 것 같더라고요. 근데 저는 그 부분을 잘 몰라서 혹시 다른 분들도 영어 읽어드리는 거를 좀 더 원하시는 분들 계시다면 댓글로 남겨주시거나 채팅으로 알려주시면 제가 잘 반영을 하겠습니다. 현재로서는 월, 화, 수, 목, 금, 토 이렇게 밤 12시에 라이브로 계속 읽어드리고 있는데요. 월, 수, 금은 한국어 그리고 화, 목은 영어로 읽어드리려고 계획을 하고 있습니다. 근데 앞으로 어떻게 바뀔지는 잘은 모르지만요. 네, 일단은 그렇게 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 토토리님, 안녕하세요. 느낌표 4개, 이솝우화라니 느낌표 4개. 네, 안녕하세요. 잘 지내셨나요? 네, 오늘은 이솝우화 들려드릴 겁니다. 네, 애플7님, 안녕하세요. 네, 안녕하세요. 오늘도 반갑고 환영합니다. 아모스님, 토요일 밤에도 라이브 하시나요? 아니요, 토요일 밤에는 주말에는 그냥 제가 쉬려고 네, 당장은 안 하고 있고요. 토요일 어쩌면 가끔 이제 낭독은 아니더라도 비공식적인 라이브? Q&A라든지 그냥 잡담을 한다든지 그런 거는 종종 할 수 있을 것 같긴 한데요. 그게 토요일 밤이 될지 아니면 오후가 될지 그거는 아직은 잘 모르겠습니다. 아마 제가 그렇게 하게 되면은 오후는 아니고 오전이 될 가능성이 높고요. 네, 하여간 그렇습니다. 네. 다른 질문이 없으시다면 그냥 바로 진행할까 싶네요. 네, 아모스님, 주말은 쉬셔야죠. 매일 이렇게 라이브 하는 것도 쉽지 않을 텐데요. 감사합니다. 사실 그렇게 어렵지 않아요. 그냥 저도 되게 하면서 이거 시작하기 전에는 긴장을 많이 했는데 하고 나니까 그냥 좋아서 계속 하고 싶고요. 근데 네, 주말은 좀 쉬어야지 제가 장기간으로 이걸 할 수 있을 것 같아서 네, 그렇게 결정을 했습니다. 저는 가늘고 길게 가는 걸 좋아합니다. 네, 토토리님, 궁금한 게 있는데 평일 라이브 하시면 기존에 올리시던 영상 대신 라이브로 대체하시는 걸까요? 네. 굉장히 좋은 질문이신데요. 네, 맞아요. 제가 지금까지 영상을 올리던 게 텀이 많이 길었잖아요. 근데 그게 뭐 여러 가지 이유가 복합적으로 있었는데 그중 하나가 이렇게 제 시간에 시간 날 때 녹음을 하고 또 녹음을 한 다음에 편집을 하잖아요. 그리고 편집이 끝난 다음에 또 유튜브에 올리는 게 그 과정 하나가 저를 되게 슬로우 다운하고 있더라고요. 그래서 이럴 바에는 그냥 라이브로 하고 맨날 하는 게 낫지 않을까 생각이 들어서 그렇게 일단은 대체하고 있습니다. 아마 특별한 콘텐츠가 아니면 이렇게 대체를 할 것 같고요. 종종 영상으로 또 뵐 수 있을 것 같긴 한데 그게 언제가 될지 그리고 어떤 콘텐츠가 될지 아직은 말씀드리기가 좀 어려울 것 같습니다. 그래서 이런 라이브로 대체하게 되면 약간 달라지는 게 브랜딩이 조금 달라진다고 할까요? 원래는 이제 저의 생각이나 뭐 제가 이런 잡담하는 거 이런 게 없는 상태로 그냥 낭독만 올려드렸는데 지금은 이제 여러분이랑 대화도 하고 제 그냥 잡담도 하고 제 생각도 이야기하고 이런 포맷이라 필요하다면 제가 라이브로 읽어드린 걸 그냥 낭독 부분만 잘라서 영상으로 올려드릴 수 있긴 해요. 근데 개인적으로 저 스스로를 바라봤을 때 제가 그걸 얼마나 꾸준히 할 수 있을까 거기에 대한 의구심이 조금 듭니다. 네, 그래서 기존에 올리던 영상 대신 라이브로 대체하는 거 맞습니다. 네, 정나래님 혹시 성우신가요? 흐흐. 네, 성우예요. 네. 성우로 일하고 있습니다. 제가 이것저것 하는 게 조금 있긴 한데요. 뭐라고 할까요? 제 벌이 중에 대부분은 성우로 벌고 있습니다. 현재로선. 언제, 유튜브 채널에 그냥 제 성우로 이렇게 데모로 레코딩한 거 샘플 하나 좀 올려드릴까 생각을 한번 해보긴 했습니다. 그래서 그게 올라올지 안 올라올지 아직은 모르겠지만 네. 토토리님 그럼요 길게 보아야죠. 네, 감사합니다. 황주부 별주구 아니고님 오늘도 해주셔서 감사합니다. 감사해요. 네, 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 저도 감사합니다. 아모스님 예전에 대한항공 광고에 목소리 나오지 않으셨나요? 대한항공은 아니고요. UAE 아시죠? 아랍에미레이트 그 항공을 위해서 광고를 2번 하긴 했습니다. 대한항공은요, 샘플 만들 때 그때 제가 대한항공 광고를 카피라이팅을 제가 뽑아서 그냥 그대로 읽어드린 건 있어요. 근데 그걸 공식적으로 대한항공이 쓰시거나 그러진 않았습니다. 네, 아모스님 피아노 연주도 들려주시면 글 남겨주셨어요. 네, 잘 마음에 간직해두고요. 노력해보겠습니다. 인트로로 나오는 음악도 사실 제가 연주하긴 한 거거든요. 근데 대학교에서 피아노를 전공하다 보니까 왠지 모르게 피아노 치고 그걸 올리는 거에 대한 되게 쑥스러움 이상의 그런 게 있달까요? 하지만 네, 노력을 해서 연습을 일단 잘 해서요. 올려드리도록 하겠습니다. 네. 생각이 없진 않았어요. 그리고 이것저것 곡 작업도 제가 좀 하는데 오케스트레이션을 제가 좋아하거든요. 그래서 앨범 하나 낸 거 몇 년 됐지만 이제 그때보다 좀 진전이 좀 있었기 때문에 다른 클래식 곡도 오케스트레이션 해서 앨범을 내서 올려드리려고 네. 생각뿐만 아니라 작업을 계속 진행 중인데요. 이게 언제 완성될지 그거는 잘은 모르겠어요. 하지만 피아노 앨범도 언제 내보도록 가능하면 올해 안에 올려서 업로드할 수 있도록 한번 해보겠습니다. 네. 네, 황주부 별주고 아니고님, 어머 그러셨군요. 아모스님, 아 그렇군요. 점점. 도토리님, 헉, 집노패디를 직접 연주하신 거였다니. 네, 황주부 별주고 아니고님, 인트로만 들어도 잠이 와요. 파블로프의 멍멍이처럼요. 네, 제가 노린 거예요. 근데 제가 곡 작업을 앞으로 좀 하다 보면은 인트로 곡이 바뀔 수도 있을 것 같은데 뭐 일단 그날이 오면은 그때가 되면 그때가 되도록 뭐 네, 물 흐르듯 한번 해보겠습니다. 토토리님 다재다능하신 분이셨군요. 짝짝짝. 네, 감사합니다. 그냥 이것저것 관심이 많아서요. 뭐 이것저것 하나 찔러보는 그런 쪽인데 그렇게 깊게 파고드는 그런 건 좀 부족한 것 같습니다. 네. 칙칙님 아니면 씩씩님이라 불러야 되나요? 오늘 꿀잠 잘 수 있겠네요. 네, 감사합니다. 잘 오셨고요. 응원합니다. 네. 제가 잘 주무실 수 있도록 노력을 최선을 다해 보겠습니다. 네. 오늘도 여러분들과의 소통으로 잠깐 시작을 했는데요. 저는 솔직히 책 읽는 것도 좋은데 여러분들이랑 이렇게 얘기하는 것도 너무 좋은 것 같습니다. 일단 이제 낭독을 시작할까 하고요. 네. 썸네일에서 보셨던 것 같이 이솝우화를 영어로 들려드리려고 합니다. 네, 이 이솝우화는요. 저작권이 만료돼서 그냥 바로 읽어드릴 수 있는 작품이고요. 설명란에 보시면 혹시 같이 읽고 싶으신 분 계시면 설명란에 링크를 하나 올려놨어요. 구툰베르그.org라고 네, 이게 다 저작권이 만료된 책 작품들을 올려놓은 좋은 사이트입니다. 근데 저작권이 만료됐다는 거는 그만큼 작품이 좀 오래됐다는 뜻이기도 해서 이게 어린 아이들을 위한 작품이지만 사실 그렇게 마냥 쉽진 않아요. 왜냐면 단어가 옛날 단어가 좀 있기도 하고 사실 아마 저도 읽으면서 모르는 단어들도 좀 있을 것 같은데요. 뭐 그렇게 되면은 최대한 티 안 내고 네, 얼부물어서 네, 잘 한번 해보겠습니다. 네, 읽어드릴게요. Aesop's Fables. Author Aesop. Translated by V.S. Vernon Jones. The Fox and the Grapes. A hungry fox saw some fine bunches of grapes hanging from a vine that was trained along a high trellis, and did his best to reach them by jumping as high as he could into the air. But it was all in vain, for they were just out of reach. So he gave up trying, and walked away with an air of dignity and unconcern, remarking, "I thought those grapes were ripe, but I see now they are quite sour." The Goose that laid the golden eggs. A man and his wife had the good fortune to possess a goose which laid a golden egg every day. Lucky though they were, they soon began to think they were not getting rich fast enough, and, imagining the bird must be made of gold inside, they decided to kill it in order to secure the whole store of precious metal at once. But when they cut it open, they found it was just like any other goose. Thus, they neither got rich all at once as they had hoped, nor enjoyed any longer the daily addition to their wealth. The Cat and the Mice. There was once a house that was overrun with mice. A cat heard of this and said to herself, "That's the place for me." And off she went and took up her quarters in the house, and caught the mice one by one and ate them. At last, the mice could stand it no longer, and they determined to take their holes and stay there. "That's awkward," said the cat to herself. "The only thing to do is to coax them out by a trick." So she considered a while, and then climbed up the wall and let herself hang down by her hind legs from a peg, and pretended to be dead. By and by, a mouse peeped out and saw the cat hanging there. "Aha!" it cried. "You're very clever, madame, no doubt. But you may turn yourself into a bag of meal hanging there if you like, yet you won't catch us coming anywhere near you." The Mischievous Dog. There was once a dog who used to snap at people and bite them without any provocation, and who was a great nuisance to everyone who came to his master's house. So, his master fastened a bell around his neck to warn people of his presence. The dog was very proud of the bell and strutted about tinkling it with immense satisfaction. But an old dog came up to him and said, "The fewer airs you give yourself, the better, my friend. You don't think, do you, that your bell was given you as a reward of merit? On the contrary, it is a badge of disgrace." The Charcoal Burner and the Fuller. There was once a charcoal burner who lived and worked by himself. A fuller, however, happened to come and settle in the same neighborhood. And the charcoal burner, having made his acquaintance and finding he was an agreeable sort of fellow, asked him if he would come and share his house. "We shall get to know one another better that way," he said, "and beside, our household expenses will be diminished." The fuller thanked him, but replied, "I couldn't think of it, sir. Why, everything I take such pains to whiten would be blackened in no time by your charcoal." The Mice in Council. Once upon a time, all the mice met together in council and discussed the best means of securing themselves against the attacks of the cat. After several suggestions had been debated, a mouse of some standing and experience got up and said, "I think I have hit upon a plan which will ensure our safety in the future, provided you approve and carry it out. It is that we should fasten a belt round the neck of our enemy the cat, which will, by its tinkling, warn us of her approach." This proposal was warmly applauded, and it had been already decided to adopt it, when an old mouse got upon his feet and said, "I agree with you all that the plan before us is an admirable one, but may I ask who is going to bell the cat?" The Bat and the Weasels. A bat fell to the ground and was caught by a weasel, and was just going to be killed and eaten when it begged to be let go. The weasel said he couldn't do that because he was an enemy of all birds on principle. "Oh, but," said the bat, "I'm not a bird at all. I'm a mouse." "So you are," said the weasel. "Now I come to look at you." And he let it go. Some time after this, the bat was caught in just the same way by another weasel, and, as before, begged for its life. "No," said the weasel, I never let a mouse go by any chance." "But I'm not a mouse," said the bat. "I'm a bird." "Why, so you are," said the weasel, and he too let the bat go. The Dog and the Sow. A dog and a sow were arguing, and each claimed that its own young ones were finer than those of any other animal. "Well," said the sow at last, "mine can see at any rate when they come into the world, but yours are born blind." The Fox and the Crow. A crow was sitting on a branch of a tree with a piece of cheese in her beak when a fox observed her and set his wits to work to discover some way of getting the cheese. Coming and standing under the tree, he looked up and said, "What a noble bird I see above me! Her beauty is without equal, the hue of her plumage exquisite. If only her voice is as sweet as her looks are fair, she ought without doubt to be queen of the birds." The crow was hugely flattered by this, and just to show the fox that she could sing, she gave a loud cow. Down came the cheese, of course, and the fox, snatching it up, said, "You have a voice, madame, I see. What you want is wits." The Horse and the Groom. There was once a groom who used to spend long hours clipping and combing the horse of which he had charge, but who daily stole a portion of his allowance of oats and sold it for his own profit. The horse gradually got into worse and worse condition, and at last cried to the groom, "If you really want me to look sleek and well, you must comb me less and feed me more." The Wolf and the Lamb. A wolf came upon a lamb straying from the flock, and felt some compunction about taking the life of so helpless a creature without some plausible excuse. So he cast about for a grievance and said at last, "Last year, sirrah, you grossly insulted me." "That is impossible, sir," bleated the lamb, "for I wasn't born then." "Well," retorted the wolf, "you feed in my pastures." "That cannot be," replied the lamb, "for I have never yet tasted grass." "You drink from my spring, then," continued the wolf. "Indeed, sir," said the poor lamb, "I have never yet drunk anything but my mother's milk." "Well, anyhow," said the wolf, "I'm not going without my dinner," and he sprang upon the lamb and devoured it without more ado. The Peacock and the Crane. A peacock taunted a crane with the dullness of her plumage. "Look at my brilliant colors," said she, "and see how much finer they are than your poor feathers." "I am not denying," replied the crane, "that yours are far gayer than mine, but when it comes to flying, I can soar into the clouds, whereas you are confined to the earth like any dunghill cock. The Cat and the Birds. A cat heard that the birds in an aviary were ailing. So he got himself up as a doctor, and taking with him a set of the instruments proper to his profession, presented himself at the door, and inquired after the health of the birds. We shall do very well, they replied, without letting him in, when we've seen the last of you. The Spendthrift and the Swallow. A spendthrift, who had wasted his fortune, had nothing left but the clothes in which he stood, saw a swallow one fine day in early spring. Thinking that summer had come, and that he could now do without his coat, he went and sold it for what it would fetch. A change, however, took place in the weather, and there came a sharp frost which killed the unfortunate swallow. When the spendthrift saw its dead body, he cried, "Miserable bird, thanks to you, I am perishing of cold myself." The Old Woman and the Doctor. An old woman became almost totally blind from a disease of the eyes, and, after consulting a doctor, made an agreement with him in the presence of witnesses that she should pay him a high fee if he cured her, while, if he failed, he was to receive nothing. The doctor accordingly prescribed a course of treatment, and every time he paid her a visit, he took away with him some article out of the house, until at last, when he visited her for the last time, and the cure was complete, there was nothing left. When the old woman saw that the house was empty, she refused to pay him his fee, and, after repeated refusals on her part, he sued her before the magistrates for payment of her debt. On being brought into court, she was ready with her defense. "The claimant," said she, "has stated the facts about our agreement correctly. I undertook to pay him a fee if he cured me, and he on his part promised to charge nothing if he failed. Now, he says I am cured, but I say that I am blinder than ever, and I can prove what I say. When my eyes were bad, I could at any rate see well enough to be aware that my house contained a certain amount of furniture and other things. But now, when, according to him, I am cured, I am entirely unable to see anything there at all." The Moon and Her Mother. The moon once begged her mother to make her a gown. "How can I?" replied she. "There's no fitting your figure. At one time you're a new moon, and at another you're a full moon, and between whiles you're neither one nor the other." Mercury and the Woodman. A woodman was felling a tree on the bank of a river when his axe, glancing off the trunk, flew out of his hands and fell into the water. As he stood by the water's edge, lamenting his loss, Mercury appeared and asked him the reason for his grief. And, on learning what had happened, out of pity for his distress, he dived into the river and, bringing up a golden axe, asked him if that was the one he had lost. The woodman replied that it was not, and Mercury then dived a second time, and bringing up the silver axe, asked if that was his. "No, that is not mine either," said the woodman. Once more, Mercury dived into the river and brought up the missing axe. The woodman, was overjoyed at recovering his property, and thanked his benefactor warmly, and the latter was so pleased with his honesty that he made him a present of the other 2 axes. When the Woodman told the story to his companions, one of these was filled with envy of his good fortune, and determined to try his luck for himself. So he went and began to fell a tree at the edge of the river, and presently contrived to let his axe drop into the water. Mercury appeared as before, and, on learning that his axe had fallen in, he dived and brought up a golden axe, as he had done on a previous occasion. Without waiting to be asked whether it was his or not, the fellow cried, "That's mine, that's mine," and stretched out his hand eagerly for the prize. But Mercury was so disgusted at his dishonesty that he not only declined to give him the golden axe, but also refused to recover for him the one he had let fall into the stream. The Ass, the Fox, and the Lion. An ass and a fox went into partnership and sallied out to forage for food together. They hadn't gone far before they saw a lion coming their way, at which they were both dreadfully frightened. But the fox thought he saw a way of saving his own skin, and went boldly up to the lion and whispered in his ear, "I'll manage that you shall get hold of the ass without the trouble of stalking him, if you'll promise to let me go free." The lion agreed to this, and the fox then rejoined the companion and contrived before long to lead him by a hidden pit, which some hunter had dug as a trap for wild animals, and into which he fell. When the lion saw that the ass was safely caught and couldn't get away, it was to the fox that he first turned his attention, and he soon finished him off, and then at his leisure proceeded to feast upon the ass. The Lion and the Mouse. A lion asleep in his lair was waked up by a mouse running over his face. Losing his temper, he seized it with his paw and was about to kill it. The mouse, terrified, piteously entreated him to spare its life. "Please let me go," it cried, "and one day I will repay you for your kindness." The idea of so insignificant a creature ever being able to do anything for him amused the lion so much that he laughed out loud and good-humoredly let it go. But the mouse's chance came after all. One day the lion got entangled in a net which had been spread for a game by some hunters, and the mouse heard and recognized his roars of anger and ran to the spot. Without more ado, it set to work to gnaw the ropes with its teeth, and succeeded before long in setting the lion free. "There," said the mouse, "you laughed at me when I promised I would repay you, but now you see, even a mouse can help a lion." The Crow and the Pitcher. A thirsty crow found a pitcher with some water in it, but so little was there that, try as she might, she could not reach it with her beak, and it seemed as though she would die of thirst within sight of the remedy. At last, she hit upon a clever plan. She began dropping pebbles into the pitcher, and with each pebble the water rose a little higher until at last it reached the brim, and the knowing bird was enabled to quench her thirst. The Boys and the Frogs. Some mischievous boys were playing on the edge of a pond, and, catching sight of some frogs swimming about in the shallow water, they began to amuse themselves by pelting them with stones, and they killed several of them. At last, one of the frogs put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, stop, stop, I beg of you. What is sport to you is death to us." The North Wind and the Sun. A dispute arose between the North Wind and the Sun, each claiming that he was stronger than the other. At last, they agreed to try their powers upon a traveler to see which could soonest strip him of his cloak. The North Wind had the first try, and, gathering up all his force for the attack, he came whirling furiously down upon the man, and caught up his cloak as though he would wrest it from him by one single effort. But the harder he blew, the more closely the man wrapped it around himself. Then came the turn of the Sun. At first, he beamed gently on the traveler, who soon unclasped his cloak and walked on with it hanging loosely about his shoulders. Then he shone forth in his full strength, and the man, before he had gone many steps, was glad to throw his cloak right off and complete his journey more lightly clad. The Mistress and Her Servants. A widow, thrifty and industrious, had 2 servants, whom she kept pretty hard at work. They were not allowed to lie long abed in the mornings, but the old lady had them up and doing as soon as the clock crew. They disliked intensely having to get up at such an hour, especially in winter time. And they thought that if it were not for the cock waking up their mistress so horribly early, they could sleep longer. So they caught it and wrung its neck. But they weren't prepared for the consequences. For what happened was that their mistress, not hearing the cock crow as usual, waked them up earlier than ever and set them to work in the middle of the night. The Goods and the Ills. There was a time in the youth of the world when goods and ills entered equally into the concerns of men, so that the goods did not prevail to make them altogether blessed, nor the ills to make them whole miserable. But, owing to the foolishness of mankind, the ills multiplied greatly in number and increased in strength, until it seemed as though they would deprive the goods of all share in human affairs and banish them from the earth. The latter, therefore, betook themselves to heaven and complained to Jupiter of the treatment they had received, at the same time praying to him to grant them protection from the ills, and to advise them concerning the manner of their intercourse with men. Jupiter granted the request for protection, and decreed that for the future they should not go among men openly in a body, and so be liable to attack from the hostile ills, but singly and unobserved and at infrequent and unexpected intervals. Hence it is that the earth is full of ills, for they come and go as they please and are never far away, while goods, alas, come one by one only, and have to travel all the way from heaven, so that they are very seldom seen. The Hares and the Frogs. The hares once gathered together and lamented the unhappiness of their lot, exposed as they were to dangers on all sides, and lacking the strength and the courage to hold their own. Men, dogs, birds, and beasts of prey were all their enemies, and killed and devoured them daily. And sooner than endure such persecution any longer, they one and all determined to end their miserable lives. Thus resolved and desperate, they rushed in a body towards a neighboring pool, intending to drown themselves. On the bank were sitting a number of frogs who, when they heard the noise of the hares as they ran, with one accord leaped into the water and hid themselves in the depths. Then one of the older hares, who was wiser than the rest, cried out to his companions, "Stop, my friends, take heart. Don't let us destroy ourselves after all. See, here are creatures who are afraid of us, and who must therefore be still more timid than ourselves." The Fox and the Stork. A fox invited a stork to dinner, at which the only fare provided was a large flat dish of soup. The fox lapped it up with great relish, but the stork with her long bill tried in vain to partake of the savory broth. Her evident distress caused the sly fox much amusement. But not long after, the stork invited him in turn, and set before him a pitcher with a long and narrow neck, into which she could get her bill with ease. Thus, while she enjoyed her dinner, the fox sat by hungry and helpless, for it was impossible for him to reach the tempting contents of the vessel. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A wolf resolved to disguise himself in order that he might prey upon a flock of sheep without fear of detection. So he clothed himself in a sheepskin and slipped among the sheep when they were out at pasture. He completely deceived the shepherd, and when the flock was penned for the night, he was shut in with the rest. But that very night, as it happened, the shepherd, requiring a supply of mutton for the table, laid hands on the wolf in mistake for a sheep, and killed him with his knife on the spot. The Stag in the Ox Stall. A stag, chased from his lair by the hounds, took refuge in a farmyard, and, entering a stable where a number of oxen were stalled, thrust himself under a pile of hay in a vacant stall, where he lay concealed, all but the tips of his horns. Presently, one of the oxen said to him, "What has induced you to come in here? Aren't you aware of the risk you are running of being captured by the herdsmen?" To which he replied, "Pray let me stay for the present. When night comes, I shall easily escape under cover of the dark." In the course of the afternoon, more than one of the farmhands came in to attend to the wants of the cattle. But not one of them noticed the presence of the stag, who accordingly began to congratulate himself on his escape and to express his gratitude to the oxen. "We wish you well," said the one who had spoken before, "but you are not out of danger yet. If the master comes, you will certainly be found out, for nothing ever escapes his keen eyes." Presently, sure enough, in he came, and made a great to-do about the way the oxen were kept. "The beasts are starving," he cried. "Here, give them more hay, and put plenty of litter under them." As he spoke, he seized an armful himself from the pile where the stag lay concealed, and at once detected him. Calling his men, he had him seized at once and killed for the table. The Milkmaid and Her Pail. A farmer's daughter had been out to milk the cows, and was returning to the dairy carrying her pail of milk upon her head. As she walked along, she fell amusing after this fashion. "The milk in this pail will provide me with cream. which I will make into butter and take to market to sell. With the money, I will buy a number of eggs, and with these, when hatched, will produce chickens. And by I shall have quite a large poultry yard. Then I shall sell some of my fowls, and with the money which they will bring in, I will buy myself a new gown, which I shall wear when I go to the fair, and all the young fellows will admire it and come and make love to me, but I shall toss my head and have nothing to say to them. Forgetting all about the pail and suiting the action to the word, she tossed her head. Down went the pail, all the milk was spilled, and all her fine castles in the air vanished in a moment. The Dolphins, the Whales, and the Sprat. The Dolphins quarreled with the Whales, and before very long they began fighting with one another. The battle was very fierce, and it lasted some time without any sign of coming to an end, when a Sprat thought that perhaps he could stop it. So he stepped in and tried to persuade them to give up fighting and make friends. But one of the Dolphins said to him contemptuously, "We would rather go on fighting till we're all killed than be reconciled by a Sprat like you." The Fox and the Monkey. A fox and a monkey were on the road together and fell into a dispute as to which of the two was the better born. They kept it up for some time, till they came to a place where the road passed through a cemetery full of monuments, when the monkey stopped and looked about him and gave a great sigh. "Why do you sigh?" said the fox. The monkey pointed to the tombs and replied, "All the monuments that you see here were put up in honor of my forefathers, who in their day were eminent men." The fox was speechless for a moment, but quickly recovering, he said, "Oh, don't stop at any lie, sir. You're quite safe. I'm sure none of your ancestors will rise up and expose you." The Ass and the Lapdog. There was once a man who had an ass and a lapdog. The ass was housed in the stable with plenty of oats and hay to eat, and was as well off as an ass could be. The little dog was made a great pet of by his master, who fondled him and often let him lie in his lap, and if he went out to dinner, he would bring back a tidbit or two to give him when he ran to meet him on his return. The ass had, it is true, a good deal of work to do, carting or grinding the corn, or carrying the burdens of a farm. And before long he became very jealous, contrasting his own life of labor with the ease and idleness of the lapdog. At last, one day, he broke his halter, and frisking into the house just as his master sat down to dinner, he pranced and capered about, mimicking the frolics of the little favorite, upsetting the table and smashing the crockery with his clumsy efforts. Not content with that, he even tried to jump on his master's lap, as he had so often seen the dog allowed to do. At that, the servants, seeing the danger their master was in, belabored the silly ass with sticks and cudgels, and drove him back to his stable half dead with his beating. "Alas," he cried, "all this I brought upon myself. Why could I not be satisfied with my natural and honorable position without wishing to imitate the ridiculous antics of that useless little lapdog?" The Fir Tree and the Bramble. A fir tree was boasting to a bramble, and said, somewhat contemptuously, "You poor creature, you are of no use whatever. Now look at me. I am useful for all sorts of things, particularly when men build houses. They can't do without me then." But the Bramble replied, "Ah, that's all very well, but you wait till they come with axes and saws to cut you down, and then you'll wish you were a bramble and not a fir." The Frog's Complaint Against the Sun. Once upon a time, the sun was about to take to himself a wife. The frogs, in terror, all raised their voices to the skies, and Jupiter, disturbed by the noise, asked him what they were croaking about. They replied, "The sun is bad enough even while he's single, drying up our marshes with his heat as he does. But what will become of us if he marries and begets other sons?" The Dog, the Cock, and the Fox. A dog and a cock became great friends and agreed to travel together. At nightfall, the cock flew up into the branches of a tree to roost, while the dog curled himself up inside the trunk, which was hollow. At break of day, the cock woke up and crew as usual. A fox heard and, wishing to make a breakfast of him, came and stood under the tree and begged him to come down. "I should so like," said he, "to make the acquaintance of one who has such a beautiful voice." The cock replied, "Would you just wake my porter who sleeps at the front of the tree? He'll open the door and let you in." The fox accordingly rapped on the trunk, when out rushed the dog and tore him in pieces. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat alighted on one of the horns of a bull and remained sitting there for a considerable time. When it had rested sufficiently and was about to fly away, it said to the bull, "Do you mind if I go now?" The bull merely raised his eyes and remarked without interest, "It's all one to me. I didn't notice when you came, and I shan't know when you go away." The Bear and the Travelers. Two travelers were on the road together when a bear suddenly appeared on the scene. Before he observed them, one made for a tree at the side of the road and climbed up into the branches and hid there. The other was not so nimble as his companion, and, as he could not escape, he threw himself on the ground and pretended to be dead. The bear came up and sniffed all round him, but he kept perfectly still and held his breath. For they say that a bear will not touch a dead body. The bear took him for a corpse and went away. When the coast was clear, the traveler in the tree came down and asked the other what it was the bear had whispered to him when he put his mouth to his ear. The other replied, "He told me never again to travel with a friend who deserts you at the first sign of danger." The Slave and the Lion. A slave ran away from his master, by whom he had been most cruelly treated, and, in order to avoid capture, he betook himself into the desert. As he wandered about in search of food and shelter, he came to a cave, which he entered and found to be unoccupied. Really, however, it was a lion's den, and almost immediately, to the horror of the wretched fugitive, the lion himself appeared. The man gave himself up for lost, but, to his utter astonishment, the lion, instead of springing upon him and devouring him, came and fawned upon him, at the same time whining and lifting up his paw. Observing it to be much swollen and inflamed, he examined it and found a large thorn embedded in the ball of the foot. He accordingly removed it and dressed the wound as well as he could. and in course of time it healed up completely. The lion's gratitude was unbounded. He looked upon the man and his friend as his friend, and they shared the cave for some time together. A day came, however, when the slave began to long for the society of his fellow men, and he bade farewell to the lion and returned to the town. Here, he was presently recognized and carried off in chains to his former master, who resolved to make an example of him, and ordered that he should be thrown to the beasts at the next public spectacle in the theater. On the fatal day, the beasts were loosed into the arena, and among the rest, a lion of huge bulk and ferocious aspect. And then the wretched slave was cast in among them. What was the amazement of the spectators when the lion, after one glance, bounded up to him and lay down at his feet with every expression of affection and delight. It was his old friend of the cave. The audience clamored that the slave's life should be spared, and the governor of the town, marveling at such gratitude and fidelity in a beast, decreed that both should receive their liberty. 네, 여기까지 읽고 잠깐 쉬도록 하겠습니다. 이게 제가 옛날에 생각했을 때 이솝우화 하면은 하나하나가 조금 더 살이 붙여져서 더 긴 걸로 알고 있었거든요. 근데 이렇게 보니까 되게 짧은 글들이 그냥 많이 묶여 있는 거더라고요. 그리고 이렇게 종종 글 끝에 교훈 뭐 이런 게 있거든요. 근데 교훈은 지금 안 읽고 있어요. 왜냐면 제 생각에 이 교훈이라고 설명해 놓은 건 그 이야기의 일부가 아니라 그냥 그 출판할 때 옛날에 출판할 때 한 사람이 이제 코멘터리로 적은 것 같아서 그리고 이 교훈이 이야기 전체에 있지 않아서 일부러 그냥 빼서 읽고 있거든요. 네. 이게 좀 어떤 이야기들은 이게 무슨 교훈이야 싶은 것도 있고 어떤 것들은 우리에게 네, 한국인들에게 많이 낯익은 그런 이야기들도 좀 보이는 것 같습니다. 네. 옥수수가 시험을 보면 콘테스트님, 네, ZZ 아이콘 주셨어요. 항주부 별주고 아니고님도 GZZZ 소울님, 귀 열고 들어보겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 밍밍님, 대박, 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 대박. 네, 감사합니다. 가을님, 우와. 이주연님, 대박적이시다. 멋지십니다. 난 노인과 바다 정어리쯤에서 잠드는 것 같은데. 네, 감사합니다. 세지님, 오늘도 감상하다 꿀잠 예약입니다. 네, 감사합니다. 안녕히 주무세요. KGR님, 처음 왔는데 목소리 너무 좋네요. 아, 감사합니다. 네, 제가 알기로는 이렇게 라이브로 듣다가 그냥 주무시고 냅두면요. 라이브가 끝나고 나서 광고가 뜨는 것도 없고요. 다른 영상으로 넘어가는 것도 없고 그냥 그대로 있어서 라이브로 그냥 켜고 핸드폰 화면 이렇게 화면 안 보이도록 밑으로 내려놓고 냅둬도 아마 되실 거예요. 근데 뭐 그거는 여러분들이 하시는 대로 네, 저는 그냥 읽을 뿐이니까요. 어제는 제가 철학을 좀 한국말로 읽어드렸거든요. 근데 한 이때쯤 되니까 거의 다 주무시고 계시더라고요. 그래서 왠지 뿌듯하기도 하고 약간 어, 역시 철학이구나 싶기도 했는데 과연 영어로 읽어드리면 잠이 더 잘 올까? 아니면 그게 아닐까? 궁금합니다. 다른 작품으로, 다른 작품을 영어로 읽어드릴 때는, 이렇게 문단마다는 아니고요. 뭐, 짧게 짧게 이렇게 쉴 때마다 지금까지 읽었던 내용을 약간 설명해드리고, 뭐 요약해드리고, 그러려고 생각을 했거든요. 근데 이솝우화는 이게 각각 이야기가 너무 짧다 보니까 그렇게 이야기 끝나자마자 제가 이해한 내용을 요약하고 또 다음 걸로 넘어가고 하기에는 이거는 좀 무리가 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 이솝우화는 그냥 쭉 멈추는 거 없이 읽어드리고, 네, 그냥 물을 좀 마셔야겠다 싶을 때 잠깐 쉬고, 그냥 이렇게 쉴 때 채팅 확인하고 여러분들이랑 잡담하고 그렇게 진행을 할까 싶습니다. 네, 소울님. 저는 항상 끝날 때까지 듣고 있는 것 같아요. 네. 감사합니다. 저도, 음, 마지막에 채팅에 아무런 답이 없을 때요. 그, 80%는 되게 뿌듯하고요. 20%는 조금 외로워요. 좀 그런 게 있어요. 근데, 채팅이 막, 소울님도 그렇고 이렇게 같이 끝에 아직 안 주무시는 분들이 계셔서 그래도 아직은 듣고 계시는 분들이 있구나. 그렇게 많이 외롭진 않습니다. 네. 그래도 잘 주무셔야 되는데 이게 참 딜레마죠. 네, KGR님, 크크크크크. 안나님, 수면 장애가 있어서 영어 원서 영상 틀어놓고 잤어요. 목소리 너무 좋으세요. 어, 느낌표 한 100개. 감사합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 아유, 수면 장애가 있다니 쉽지 않으시겠어요. 그래도 제가 조금이나마 도움이 될 수 있어서 참 다행입니다. 안나님은 어떻게 영어 원서가 좀 더 도움이 되시나 봐요? 제가 아무래도 한국어랑 영어랑 어떤 쪽의 비중을, 네, 할지 몰라가지고 그냥 조금 이렇게 버무려서 하는데 지금까지 영상 올릴 때는 영어가 좀 많이 적긴 했죠. 근데 그래서 앞으로는 영어도 조금 더 많이 해드리려고 생각을 합니다. 네, 홍호이리희님, 눈 감고 듣다 보니 댓글을 못 올려요. 유유. 네, 괜찮습니다. 아까 그냥 농담한 거예요. 네, 괜히 화면 보면은 또 수면에 방해되니까요. 일부러 글 안 남기셔도 되고요. 그냥 이불 안에서 따뜻하게 마음 편하게 그냥 스르르 잠드시는 게 저한테 가장 큰, 어, 솔직히 위로는 아니죠. 왜냐면은 잠들면 제가 모르니까. 하지만 잘 주무시고 있다고 제가, 가정하고, 네, 기분 좋은 마음으로 뿌듯하게 진행을 계속 할 겁니다. 네, 그러니까 일부러 댓글 남기지 않으셔도 되고요. 남기지 마세요. 잠드는데 방해되니까. 네, 세진님, 크크크크, 답변은 못 드려도 마음만은 늘 함께합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 그 마음 소중히 간직하겠습니다. 소울님, 둘 다 좋아요. 네, 감사합니다. 일단 둘 다 해볼게요. 네, 그럼 페퍼민트 차를 조금 더 마시고 다시 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 만다린님, 우와, 실시간 처음이에요. 늘 감사합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 환영합니다. 잘 오셨고요. 네. 함께 할 수 있어서, 그리고 하루의 마무리를 같이 해주셔서 저도 너무 감사합니다. 네, 세지님, 그냥 오디오북 채널이 아니라 잠잘 때 듣는 채널로 정하신 이유도 나중에 알려주시면 좋겠습니다. 네, 제가요, 나중에 알려드린다고 하면은 잊어먹고 안 하니까 지금 알려드릴게요. 그냥 채널 이름을 그렇게 지었어요. 처음에 그냥 장명으로. 시작할 때는 사실 뭐 거창한 이유가 있었다라고 말씀드리고 싶지만, 사실 한켠으로는 저도 그때 당시에 잠드는데 좀 많이 힘들어서 이것저것 막 들으면서 잠자는 걸 좋아했거든요. 그래서 뭐 내가 하니까 다른 사람들도 이런 쪽으로 도움이 될 수도 있겠다 싶어서 집에 그냥 그때 자취하고 원룸이었나? 원룸이었죠. 지하에서 아니야. 원룸이 아니고요. 그 방에 새 들어가지고 살고 있었거든요. 근데 마이크가 있어서 그걸로 그냥 시작을 해본 거고요. 또 전략적으로 보자면은 그때 또 제가 성우 일을 한번 해볼까 싶어가지고 막 하기 시작한 그때였어요. 그래서 그냥 이렇게 올렸을 때 반응이 있으면 이 시장에서 내가 어느 정도 가치가 있다는 신호일 수 있겠다 싶은 생각이어서 유튜브 채널을 그렇게 만들었고요. 잠잘 때 들려주는 이야기라고 이름을 정한 건 잠들이라고 애초에 그 세 글자를 줄여서 부르는 게 그냥 어감이 좋아서 그렇게 했습니다. 그리고 오디오북 채널로만 하면 사실 저작권 문제도 그렇고요. 좀 제약되는 게 많을 것 같아서요. 그래서 그렇게 시작을 했습니다. 그리고 지금까지 사실 라디오가 아니라 라이브로 이렇게 시작하기 전까지는 그냥 책을 낭독한 것 뿐이었지만 항상 시작부터 제 한켠에는 이렇게 잡담까지 하는, 그냥 여러분들과 소통을 하는 그런 거를 마음 한켠에 계속 두고 있었어요. 그래서 잠잘 때 들려주는 이야기라는 브랜딩이 좀 더 포괄적인 그런 느낌이어서, 네, 그렇게 쭉 시작부터 바꾸지 않고, 네, 지금까지 해왔습니다. 그리고 굉장히 지금 돌아보면은 좋은 선택이었던 것 같아요. 근데 이제 솔직히 그 프로필 그 사진이 있잖아요. 그거는 좀 구리다고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 이거를 좀 바꿔야 될 텐데 언제 바꿀지 모르겠습니다. 그리고 채널 딱 들어갔을 때 그 위에 커버 이미지 나오는 것도 있죠. 그것도 되게 올드한 느낌인데, 그것도 바꿔야 되는데 말이죠. 네, 헤르메스님, 제가 좀 늦었네요. 네, 환영합니다. 잘 오셨고요. 저번에도 같이 오셨죠? 아니, 같이 하셨죠? 네, 언제나 환영입니다. 안나님, 좋아요. 오늘도 기분 좋게 꿀잠 자보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 응원합니다. 네, 안녕히 주무세요. KGR님, 목소리가 너무 설레요. 모든 영상 정주행하게 생겼네요. 오히려 좋아. 감사합니다. 부끄럽게 왜 그러세요? 헤르메스님, 오늘 꿀잠 예약이네요. 네, 나이스. 안나님, 오, 저예요. 제가 그런 상태. 맨날 뭐 틀어놓아요. 네, 저도 그래요. 아, 근데 이게 좀 딜레마인 게 자다가 좀, 음, 자다가 막, 아니, 자다가가 아니라 잠자려고 하는데 잠이 안 오잖아요. 근데 제가 최근에는 팟캐스트를 막 틀고 자기도 했었는데 그러다 보면 이게 습관이 되는데 또 이게 또 듣다 보면은 재밌을 때가 있잖아요. 그러면 또 그것 때문에 잠을 못 자. 그런, 아, 이게 참 진짜 딜레마인 것 같아요. 그래서, 음, 네. 그래서 저도 읽을 때 이게 조금 딜레마이라고도 볼 수 있는 게, 그리고 목소리를 이렇게 일부러 깔고 이야기를 드리는 게 옛날에는 이제, 녹음 상황도 좀 좋지 않았고, 마이크도 좀 그렇게 좋지 않아서 조곤조곤하게 말하는 게 아니라 일상 대화하듯이 그렇게 말을 했는데요. 그러다 보면 아무래도 어 정신이 조금 더 깰 수도 있을 것 같아 가지고 음 네. 그리고 '뭘 읽어 드릴까.' 하다가도 너무 재밌는 책을 읽어 드리면은 오히려 못 주무시는 거 아닌가 생각도 들기도 하고요. 근데 뭐 어쩔 수 없는 거겠죠. 저는 그냥 여러분들이 좋아하실 만한 걸 찾고 그걸 그냥 읽어 드리면 거기까지가 제가 할 수 있는 본부라고 생각을 하고요. 네. 헤르메스님, 좋아요 안 구려요. 아, 감사합니다. 세지님, 오, 그렇군요. 덕분에 재밌는 라이브가 된 것 같아요. 잡담조차 잔잔하게 잠이 오면서 소통도 하는, 감사합니다. 제가 바로 의도하던 바예요. 헤르메스님, 네. 근데 페퍼민트는 마시자마자 목은 편한데 장시간 오히려 목을 드라이하게 합니다. 허브는 목을 안 쓰실 때는 너무 좋고 목을 사용할 중일 때는 조금 조심해야 돼요. 아, 정말요? 저 몰랐어요. 좋은 정보 감사합니다. 곧바로 내일부터 물로 바꿔보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 꿀팁 감사합니다. 세지님, 혹시 바꾸고 싶으시다면 이미지는 GPT에게 만들어 달라고 하자는 아이디어 하나 남기고 마저 자러 가보겠습니다. 네, 세지님, 아이디어 감사합니다. 안녕히 주무시고요. 사실 로고를 몇 번 그렇게 해봤어요. 근데 아, 일단 이게 그 로고에서 제가 표현하고자 하는 바를 저 스스로가 잘 아직 정해진 게 없다 보니까 내가 뭘 원하는지도 모르겠고 그냥 네, 지금은 그렇거든요. 그래서 나중에 그냥 제가 뭘 원하는가 이렇게 좀 더 구체화되면 그때 뭐 네, AI를 써서 만들든 아니든 근데 개인적으로는 음 사람을 써서 아직은 작업하는 거를 조금 더 선호해요. 그 제가 이런 형태를 원한다. 이런 커뮤니케이션이 가능하고 또 그냥 아무래도 한 번 돈을 들이고 인제 제가 쭉 쓸 수 있는 거다 보니까 그래도 네 같은 비슷한 프리랜서한테 서포트하는 게 더 낫지 않을까 하는 생각도 있고요. 근데 뭐 앞으로 잘은 모르겠습니다. 네. 아이디어 감사하고요. 달달아 님, 이제부터 매일 밤 라이브 들으면서 잠들면 되겠네요. 전 이제 눈 감고 들을게요. 모두 잘 자요. 네. 달달아 님, 언제든 환영이고요. 네. 감사합니다. 안녕히 주무시고요. 안녕히 주무세요. 좋은 밤 되세요. KGR 님, 괜찮아요. 안 바꿔도 됩니다. 목소리가 이미 명품이니까요. 아유, 감사합니다. 쑥스럽게. 소울님, 그래서 같은 이야기 100번 듣는 것 같아요. 사람은 무엇으로 사는가, 네, 맞아요. 그게 사실 아직도 가장 조회수가 가장 많은 영상 중 하나죠. 헤르메스님, 저도 목소리가 직업이어서 레슨 중일 때, 연습 중일 때 저도 학생들도 허브보단 물을 마셔요. 아, 그러시구나. 네, 감사합니다. 헤르메스님, 저번에 침 삼킬 때 어떻게 하냐고 여쭤보셨잖아요. 제가 조금 더 생각해 보니까 저도 이제 갑자기 급하게 그렇게 일이 있으면 마이크에서 조금 거리를 뗐다가 네, 그렇게 하기도 하고요. 저번에 말씀드린 것처럼 마이크를 잠깐 껐다가 다시 켜기도 하고요. 네, 그렇긴 한데 헤르메스님 혹시 어떤 직업이신지 여쭤봐도 실례가 아닐까요? 레슨이라시면 혹시 음악이나 그쪽일까요? 뭐, 아, 저는 노래가 직업인데 이렇게 낭독도 하고 싶어요. 아, 그러시구나. 아, 멋있어요. 성악가시구나. 대단하신데요. 네, 성악가님께서 주시는 팁 꼭, 네, 앞으로는 허브 말고 물로 목을, 네, 목을, 갑자기 단어가 생각이 안 나는데, 목을 또, 죄송합니다. 제가 종종 이렇게 한국말이 좀 에러가 나요. 하여간, 네, 목을 축이겠습니다. 물로. 감사합니다. 낭독도 하고 싶어요. 라고 글 남겨주셨어요. 낭독 초보라서 명품 목소리 듣고 감동. 성대. 아, 감사합니다. 네, 응원합니다. 성악가시면은 이미 99%는 다 하셨네요. 나머지는 사실 그냥 어렵지 않으니까요. 네. 혹시 하시는 채널을 이렇게 하시거나, 네, 낭독 시작하시면 알려주세요. 제가 들어가서 응원을 네, 드리겠습니다. 네, 그럼 잡담을 이렇게 했으니까 다시 한번 글을 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 지금까지 짧은 이야기가 많이 있었고요. 이서무화들이 이게 다 짧은 이야기들을 많이 묶여놓은 것 같아요. 네, 그럼 다시 시작해 보겠습니다. The Flea and the Man. A flea bit a man, and bit him again and again, till he could stand it no longer, but made a thorough search for it, and at last succeeded in catching it. Holding it between his finger and thumb, he said, or rather shouted, so angry was he, "Who are you, pray, you wretched little creature, that you make so free with my person?" The flea, terrified, whimpered in a weak little voice, "Oh, sir, pray let me go. Don't kill me. I am such a little thing that I can't do you much harm." But the man laughed and said, "I am going to kill you now at once. Whatever is bad has got to be destroyed, no matter how slight the harm it does." The Bee and Jupiter. A queen bee from Hymettus flew up to Olympus with some fresh honey from the hive as a present to Jupiter, who was so pleased with the gift that he promised to give her anything she liked to ask for. She said she would be very grateful if he would give stings to the bees to kill people who robbed them of their honey. Jupiter was greatly displeased with his request, for he loved mankind, but he had given his word, so he said that stings they should have. The stings he gave them, however, were of such a kind that whenever a bee stings a man, the sting is left in the wound and the bee dies. The Oak and the Reeds. An oak that grew on the bank of a river was uprooted by a several gale of wind and thrown across a stream. It fell among some reeds growing by the water and said to them, "How is it that you, who are so frail and slender, have managed to weather the storm, whereas I, with all my strength, have been torn by the roots and hurled into the river?" "You were stubborn," came the reply, "and fought against the storm, which proved stronger than you. But we bow and yield to every breeze, and thus the gale passed harmlessly over our heads." The Blind Man and the Cub. There was once a blind man who had so fine a sense of touch that, when any animal was put into his hands, he could tell what it was merely by the feel of it. One day the cub of a wolf was put into his hands, and he was asked what it was. He felt it for some time and then said, "Indeed, I am not sure whether it is a wolf's cub or a fox's, but this I know, it would never do to trust it in a sheepfold." The Boy and the Snails. A farmer's boy went looking for snails, and when he had picked up both his hands full, he set about making a fire at which to roast them. For he meant to eat them. When it got well alight, and the snails began to feel the heat, they gradually withdrew more and more into their shells with the hissing noise they always make when they do so. When the boy heard it, he said, "You abandoned creatures, how can you find heart to whistle when your houses are burning?" The Apes and the Two Travelers. Two men were traveling together, one of whom never spoke the truth, whereas the other never told a lie. And they came in the course of their travels to the land of apes. The king of the apes, hearing of their arrival, ordered them to be brought before him. And by way of impressing them with his magnificence, he received them sitting on a throne, while the apes, his subjects, were ranged in long rows on either side of him. When the travelers came into his presence, he asked them what they thought of him as a king. The lying traveler said, "Sire, everyone must see that you are a most noble and mighty monarch." "And what do you think of my subjects?" continued the king. "They," said the traveler, "are in every way worthy of their royal master." The ape was so delighted with his answer that he gave him a very handsome present. The other traveler thought that if his companion was rewarded so splendidly for telling a lie, he himself would certainly receive a still greater reward for telling the truth. So, when the ape turned to him and said, "And what, sir, is your opinion?" he replied, "I think you are a very fine ape, and all your subjects are fine apes too." The king of the apes was so enraged at his reply that he ordered him to be taken away and clawed to death. The Ass and His Burdens. A peddler who owned an ass one day bought a quantity of salt and loaded up his beast with as much as he could bear. On the way home, the ass stumbled as he was crossing a stream and fell into the river. The salt got thoroughly wetted, and much of it melted and drained away, so that, when he got on his legs again, the ass found his load had become much less heavy. His master, however, drove him back to town and bought more salt, which he added to what remained in the panniers, and started out again. No sooner had they reached the stream than the ass lay down in it, and rose as before with a much lighter load. But his master detected the trick, and turning back once more, bought a large number of sponges and piled them on the back of the ass. When they came to the stream, the ass again lay down, but this time, as the sponges soaked up large quantities of water, he found, when he got up on his legs, that he had a bigger burden to carry than ever. The Shepherd's Boy and the Wolf. A shepherd's boy was tending his flock near a village, and thought it would be great fun to hoax the villagers by pretending that a wolf was attacking the sheep. So he shouted out, "Wolf, wolf!" And when the people came running up, he laughed at them for their pains. He did this more than once, and every time the villagers found they had been hoaxed, for there was no wolf at all. At last, a wolf really did come, and the boy cried, "Wolf, wolf," as loud as he could. But the people were so used to hearing him call that, they took no notice of his cries for help. And so the wolf had it all his own way, and killed off sheep after sheep at his leisure. The Fox and the Goat. A fox fell into a well and was unable to get out again. By and by, a thirsty goat came by, and seeing the fox in the well, asked him if the water was good. "Good," said the fox. "It's the best water I've ever tasted in my life. Come down and try yourself." The goat thought of nothing but the prospect of quenching his thirst, and jumped in at once. When he had had enough to drink, he looked about, like the fox, for some way of getting out, but could find none. Presently the fox said, "I have an idea. You stand on your hind legs and plant your forelegs firmly against the side of the well, and then I'll climb on your back, and from there, by stepping on your horns, I can get out. And when I'm out, I'll help you out too." The goat did as he was requested, and the fox climbed onto his back and so out of the well. And then he coolly walked away. The goat called loudly after him and reminded him of his promise to help him out. But the fox merely turned and said, "If you had as much sense in your head as you have hair in your beard, you wouldn't have got into the well without making certain that you could get out again." The Fisherman and the Sprat. A fisherman cast his net into the sea, and when he drew it up again, it contained nothing but a single sprat that begged to be put back into the water. "I'm only a little fish now," it said, "but I shall grow big one day, and then if you come and catch me again, I shall be of some use to you." But the fisherman replied, "Oh no, I shall keep you now when I've got you. Now, if I put you back, shall I ever see you again? Not likely." The Boasting Traveler. A man once went abroad on his travels, and when he came home, he had wonderful tales to tell of the things he had done in foreign countries. Among other things, he said he had taken part in a jumping match at Rhodes and had done a wonderful jump which no one could beat. "Just go to Rhodes and ask them," he said. "Everyone will tell you it's true." But one of those who were listening said, "If you can jump as well as all that, we needn't go to Rhodes to prove it. Let's just imagine this is Rhodes for a minute, and now, jump." The Crab and His Mother. An old crab said to her son, "Why do you walk sideways like that, my son? You ought to walk straight." The young crab replied, "Show me how, dear mother, and I'll follow your example." The old crab tried, but tried in vain, and then saw how foolish she had been to find fault with her child. The Ass and His Shadow. A certain man hired an ass for a journey in summertime, and started out with the owner following behind to drive the beast. By and by, in the heat of the day, they stopped to rest, and the traveler wanted to lie down in the ass's shadow. But the owner, who himself wished to be out of the sun, wouldn't let him do that, for, he said, he had been hired the ass only, and not his shadow. The other maintained that his bargain secured him complete control of the ass for the time being. From words they came to blows, and while they were belaboring each other, the ass took his heels and was soon out of sight. The Farmer and His Sons. A farmer, being at death's door, and desiring to impart to his sons a secret of such moment, called them round him and said, "My sons, I am surely about to die. I would have you know, therefore, that in my vineyard there lies a hidden treasure. Dig, and you will find it." As soon as their father was dead, the sons took spade and fork and turned up the soil of the vineyard over and over again. In their search for the treasure which they supposed to lie buried there, they found none, however, but the vines, after so thorough a digging, produced a crop such as had never before been seen. The Dog and the Cook. A rich man once invited a number of his friends and acquaintances to a banquet. His dog thought it would be a good opportunity to invite another dog, a friend of his. So he went to him and said, "My master is giving a feast. There'll be a fine spread, so come and dine with me tonight." The dog thus invited came, and when he saw the preparations being made in the kitchen, he said to himself, "My word, I'm in luck. I'll take care to eat enough tonight to last me 2 or 3 days." At the same time, he wagged his tail briskly, by way of showing his friend how delighted he was to have been asked. But just then, the cook caught sight of him and said, in his annoyance at seeing a strange dog in the kitchen, caught him up by the hind legs and threw him out of the window. He had a nasty fall and limped away as quickly as he could, howling dismally. Presently some other dogs met him and said, "Well, what sort of a dinner did you get?" To which he replied, "I had a splendid time. The wine was so good, I drank so much of it, that I really don't remember how I got out of the house." The Monkey as King. At a gathering of all the animals, the monkey danced and delighted them so much that they made him their king. The fox, however, was very much disgusted at the promotion of the monkey. So, having one day found a trap with a piece of meat in it, he took the monkey there and said to him, "Here is a dainty morsel I have found, sire. I did not take it myself, because I thought it ought to be reserved for you, our king. Will you be pleased to accept it?" The monkey made at once for the meat and got caught in the trap. Then he bitterly reproached the fox for leading him into danger. But the fox only laughed and said, "Oh, monkey, You call yourself king of the beasts and haven't more sense than to be taken in like that. The Thieves and the Cock. Some thieves broke into a house and found nothing worth taking except a cock, which they seized and carried off with them. When they were preparing their supper, one of them caught up the cock and was about to wring his neck when he cried out for mercy and said, "Pray don't kill me. You will find me a most useful bird, for I rouse honest men to their work in the morning by my crowing." But the thief replied with some heat, "Yes, I know you do, making it still harder for us to get a livelihood. Into the pot you go." The Farmer and Fortune. A farmer was plowing one day on his farm when he turned up a pot of golden coins with his plow. He was overjoyed at his discovery, and from that time forth made an offering daily at the shrine of the goddess of the earth. Fortune was displeased at this, and came to him and said, "My man, why do you give earth the credit for the gift which I bestowed upon you? You never thought of thanking me for your good luck, but should you be unlucky enough to lose what you have gained, I know very well that I, Fortune, should then come in for all the blame." Jupiter and the Monkey. Jupiter issued a proclamation to all the beasts, and offered a prize to the one who, in his judgment, produced the most beautiful offspring. Among the rest came the monkey, carrying a baby monkey in her arms, a hairless, flat-nosed little fright. When they saw it, the gods all burst into peal on peal of laughter. But the monkey hugged her little one to her and said, "Jupiter may give the prize to whomsoever he likes, but I shall always think my baby the most beautiful of them all." Father and Sons. A certain man had several sons who were always quarreling one with another, and, try as he might, he could not get them to live together in harmony. So he determined to convince them of their folly by the following means. Bidding them fetch a bundle of sticks, he invited each in turn to break it across his knee. All tried and all failed, and then he undid the bundle and handed them the sticks one by one. When they had no difficulty at all in breaking them, "There, my boy," said he, "united you will be more than a match for your enemies, but if you quarrel and separate, your weakness will put you at the mercy of those who attack you." The Lamp. A lamp, well filled with oil, burned with a clear and steady light, and began to swell with pride and boast that it shone more brightly than the sun himself. Just then a puff of wind came and blew it out. Someone struck a match and lit it again and said, "You just keep a light and never mind the sun. Why, even the stars never need to be relit as you had to be just now." The Owl and the Birds. The owl is a very wise bird, and once long ago, when the first oak sprouted in the forest, she called all the other birds together and said to them, "You see this tiny tree? If you take my advice, you will destroy it now when it is small, for when it grows big, the mistletoe will appear upon it, from which birdlime will be prepared for your destruction." Again, when the first flax was sown, she said to them, "Go and eat up that seed, for it is the seed of the flax, out of which men will one day make nets to catch you." Once more, when she saw the first archer, she warned the birds that he was their deadly enemy, who would wing his arrows with their own feathers and shoot them. But they took no notice of what she said. In fact, they thought she was rather mad and laughed at her. When, however, everything turned out as she had foretold, they changed their minds and conceived a great respect for her wisdom. Hence, whenever she appears, the birds attend upon her in the hope of hearing something that may be for their good. She, however, gives them no advice any longer, but sits moping and pondering on the folly of her kind. The Ass in the Lion's Skin. An ass found a lion's skin and dressed himself up in it. Then he went out about frightening everyone he met, for they all took him to be a lion, men and beasts alike, and took to their heels when they saw him coming. Elated by the success of his trick, he loudly brayed in triumph. The fox heard him and recognized him at once for the ass he was, and said to him, "Oh ho, my friend, it's you, is it? I, too, should have been afraid if I hadn't heard your voice." The she-goats and their beards. Jupiter granted beards to the she-goats at their own request, much to the disgust of the he-goats, who considered this to be an unwarrantable invasion of their rights and dignities. So they sent a deputation to him to protest against his action. He, however, advised them not to raise any objections. "What's in a tuft of hair?" said he. "Let them have it if they want it. They can never be a match for you in strength." The Old Lion. A lion, enfeebled by age and no longer able to procure food for himself by force, determined to do so by cunning. Betaking himself to a cave, he lay down inside and feigned to be sick. And whenever any of the other animals entered to inquire after his health, he sprang upon them and devoured them. Many lost their lives in this way, till one day a fox called at the cave and, having a suspicion of the truth, addressing the lion from outside instead of going in, and asked him how he did. He replied that he was in a very bad way. "But," said he, "why do you stand outside? Pray come in." "I should have done so," answered the fox, "if I hadn't noticed that all the footprints point towards the cave and none the other way." The Boy Bathing. A boy was bathing in a river and got out of his depth, and was in great danger of being drowned. A man who was passing along a road heard his cries for help, and went to the riverside and began to scold him for being so careless as to get into the deep water, but made no attempt to help him. "Oh, sir," cried the boy, "please help me first and scold me afterwards." Give assistance, not advice, in a crisis. The Quack Frog. Once upon a time, a frog came forth from his home in the marshes and proclaimed to all the world that he was a learned physician, skilled in drugs and able to cure all diseases. Among the crowd was a fox who called out, "You, a doctor? Why, how can you set up to heal others when you cannot even cure your own lame legs and blotched and wrinkled skin?" Physician, heal thyself. The Swollen Fox. A hungry fox found in a hollow tree a quantity of bread and meat, which some shepherds had placed there against their return. Delighted with his find, he slipped in through the narrow aperture and greedily devoured it all. But when he tried to get out again, he found himself so swollen after his big meal that he could not squeeze through the hole, and fell to whining and groaning over his misfortune. Another fox, happening to pass that way, came and asked him what the matter was, and, on learning the state of the case, said, "Well, my friend, I see nothing for it but for you to stay where you are till you shrink to your former size. You'll get out then easily enough." The Mouse, the Frog, and the Hawk. A mouse and a frog struck up a friendship. They were not well mated, for the mouse lived entirely on land, while the frog was equally at home on land or in the water. In order that they might never be separated, the frog tied himself and the mouse together by the leg with a piece of thread. As long as they kept on dry land, all went fairly well. But, coming to the edge of a pool, the frog jumped in, taking the mouse with him, and began swimming about and croaking with pleasure. The unhappy mouse, however, was soon drowned, and floated about on the surface in the wake of the frog. There he was spied by a hawk, who pounced down on him and seized him in his talons. The frog was unable to loose a knot which bound him to the mouse, and thus was carried off along with him and eaten by the hawk. The Boy and the Nettles. A boy was gathering berries from a hedge when his hand was stung by a nettle. Smarting with the pain, he ran to tell his mother and said to her between his sobs, "I only touched it ever so lightly, mother. That's just why you got stung, my son," she said. "If you had grasped it firmly, it wouldn't have hurt you in the least." The Peasant and the Apple Tree. A peasant had an apple tree growing in his garden which bore no fruit, but merely served to provide a shelter from the heat for the sparrows and grasshoppers, which sat and chirped in its branches. Disappointed at its barrenness, he determined to cut it down, and went and fetched his axe for the purpose. But when the sparrows and grasshoppers saw that what he was about to do, they begged him to spare it and said to him, "If you destroy the tree, we shall have to seek shelter elsewhere, and you will no longer have our merry chirping to enliven your work in the garden." He, however, refused to listen to them and set to work with a will to cut through the trunk. A few strokes showed that it was hollow inside and contained a warm swarm of bees and a large store of honey. Delighted with his find, he threw down his axe, saying, "The old tree is worth keeping after all." Utility is most men's test of worth. The Jackdaw and the Pigeons. A jackdaw, watching some pigeons in a farmyard, was filled with envy when he saw how well they were fed, and determined to disguise himself as one of them in order to secure a share of the good things they enjoyed. So he painted himself white from head to foot and joined the flock. And, so long as he was silent, they never suspected that he was not a pigeon like themselves. But one day he was unwise enough to start chattering, when they at once saw through his disguise and pecked him so unmercifully that he was glad to escape and join his own kind again. But the other jackdaws did not recognize him in his white dress, and would not let him feed with him, but drove him away. And so he became a homeless wanderer for his pains. Jupiter and the Tortoise. Jupiter was about to marry a wife, and determined to celebrate the event by inviting all the animals to a banquet. They all came except the tortoise, who did not put in an appearance, much to Jupiter's surprise. So, when he next saw the tortoise, he asked him why he had not been at the banquet. "I don't care for going out," said the tortoise. "There's no place like home." Jupiter was so much annoyed by this reply that he decreed that from that time forth the tortoise should carry his house upon his back and never be able to get away from home even if he wished to. The Dog in the Manger. A dog was lying in a manger on the hay, which had been put there for the cattle, and when they came and tried to eat, he growled and snapped at them and wouldn't let them get their food. "What a selfish beast," said one of them to his companions. "He can't eat himself, and yet he won't let those eat who can." The Two Bags. Every man carries 2 bags about with him, one in front and one behind, and both are packed full of faults. The bag in front contains his neighbor's faults, the bag behind his own. Hence it is that men do not see their own faults, but never fail to see those of others. The Oxen and the Axle Trees. A pair of oxen were drawing a heavily loaded wagon along the highway, and as they tugged and strained at the yoke, the axle trees creaked and groaned terribly. This was too much for the oxen, who turned round indignantly and said, "Hello, you there! Why do you make such a noise when we all do the work?" They complain most who suffer least. The Boy and the Filberts. A boy put his hand into a jar of filberts and grasped as many as his fist could possibly hold. But when he tried to pull it out again, he found he couldn't do so, for the neck of the jar was too small to allow for the passage of so large a handful. Unwilling to lose his nuts, but unable to withdraw his hand, he burst into tears. A bystander, who saw where the trouble lay, said to him, "Come, my boy, don't be so greedy. Be content with half the amount, and you'll be able to get your hand out without difficulty. Do not attempt too much at once." The Frogs asking for a king. Time was when the frogs were discontented because they had no one to rule over them. So they sent a deputation to Jupiter to ask him to give them a king. Jupiter, despising the folly of their request, cast a log into the pool where they lived, and said that the log should be their king. The frogs were terrified at first by the splash, and scuttled away into the deepest parts of the pool. But by and by, when they saw that the log remained motionless, one by one, they ventured into the surface again, and before long, growing bolder, they began to feel such contempt for it that they even took to sitting upon it. Thinking that a king of that sort was an insult to their dignity, they sent to Jupiter a second time, and begged him to take away the sluggish king he had given them, and to give them another and a better one. Jupiter, annoyed at being pestered in this way, sent a stork to rule over them, who no sooner arrived among them than he began to catch and eat the frogs as fast as he could. The Olive Tree and the Fig Tree. An olive tree taunted a fig tree with the loss of her leaves at a certain season of the year. "You," she said, "lose your leaves every autumn, and are bare till the spring, whereas I, you see, remain green and flourishing all the year round. Soon afterwards, there came a heavy fall of snow, which settled on the leaves of the olive so that she bent and broke under the weight. But the flakes fell harmlessly through the bare branches of the fig, which survived to bear many another crop. The Lion and the Boar. One hot and thirsty day in the height of summer, a lion and a boar came down to a little spring at the same moment to drink. In a trice, they were quarreling as to who should drink first. The quarrel soon became a fight, and they attacked one another with the utmost fury. Presently, stopping for a moment to take breath, they saw some vultures seated on a rock above, evidently waiting for one of them to be killed, when they would fly down and feed upon the carcass. The sight sobered them at once, and they made up their quarrel, saying, "We had much better be friends than fight and be eaten by vultures." 네, 아무래도 여기까지 읽어드리고 이제 그만 마쳐야 될 것 같습니다. 다들 잘 누워 계신가요? 네, 저는 읽으면서 생각보다 이솝우화가 되게 지혜로운 글이구나 느끼네요. 네, 아까 말씀드렸듯이 어떤 거는 그냥 이게 뭔 얘기지 싶은 것도 있는데요. 어떤 거는 읽다가 와, 되게 생각을 많이 하게 하는 그런 글이다 싶기도 한 것 같네요. 네, 옛날 글이다 보니까 옛날에 1912년에 번역된 걸로 알고 있는데요. 그렇다 보니까 단어랑 문장 구조가 좀 되게 올드하긴 해요. 근데 네, 낭독이 그래도 어떻게 잘 되었는지 모르겠습니다만 듣는 분들께 조금 편했으면 좋겠네요. 네, 망치망치님 굿나잇 하셨어요. 네, 굿나잇입니다. 안녕히 주무세요. 헤르메스님 감사해요. 너무 좋았습니다. 남겨주셨어요. 네, 감사합니다. 그렇게 항상 좋게 봐주셔서 저도 너무 감사해요. 네, 소울님 목도 안 좋으신데 고생하셨습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 끝까지 함께 해주셔서 저도 감사하고요. 오늘 네, 아무래도 민트 차를 마셔서 그런 건지 모르겠는데 목소리가 좀 중간에 갑자기 칼칼해지고 막 그러네요. 네, 내일부터는 조금 더 조심조심 물을 마시고 잘 한번 해봐야겠습니다. 네, 다시 한번 끝까지 함께 해주신 여러분들 너무나 감사드리고요. 오늘 어떻게 좋은 하루 보내셨는지 모르겠지만 내일도 힘찬 하루, 행복한 하루, 그리고 추운 날씨에 따뜻하게 잘 지내시고요. 네, 무슨 일을 하시든 건강하시고 또 힘내시길 이곳에서 바라겠습니다. 네, 그럼 저는 이만 이렇게 인사를 드리고요. 좋은 밤 되시길, 그리고 좋은 잘 주무시길 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다. 내일 뵐게요. 안녕히 주무세요. 네, 헤르메스 님도 굿나잇 되세요. 소울 님도 안녕히 계세요.